There are moments in this sport that remind you exactly why NASCAR fans fall in love with it in the first place. One minute you're watching a young driver chase the biggest win of his career, and the next minute, a single sentence spoken in victory lane turns into the most talked about storyline of the entire weekend. That's the strange magic of this sport. It's never just about who crosses the finish line first. It's about pride, emotion, rivalry, and sometimes the things that slip out after the checkered flag falls. And after the race weekend in San Diego, there's no question that a comment made in the immediate aftermath of victory has the entire garage talking. What should have been a clean, feel-good celebration turned into one of the more debated moments of the season. Depending on how you choose to interpret it, this moment might say something important about the competitive temperature inside one of NASCAR's biggest organizations right now. Nobody seems entirely certain how the remark was meant, but the way it landed has clearly struck a nerve across the sport. So let's walk through exactly what happened, why it's generating so much conversation, and what it might mean going forward. Once the race wrapped up and the adrenaline started to settle, attention naturally turned toward Heim. And rightfully so. At only 23 years old, Heim captured the biggest win of his Cup Series career by taking the checkered flag in San Diego, delivering a major result for his race team. For a driver still working to establish himself at the highest level of stock car racing, this was precisely the type of breakout moment capable of reshaping the entire arc of a career. What made the victory even more impressive was the competition he had to beat. Bubba Wallace was pushing hard in the final laps, applying constant pressure. There were stretches where it looked like Wallace might find a way around him, but Heim held his nerve, defended his line, and brought the car home first. It was a composed, mature performance against one of the more experienced drivers in the field, the kind of drive that quiets doubts about whether a young talent can handle real pressure on a big stage. That should have been the whole story walking away from San Diego. Instead, a short exchange after the race became the dominant headline. According to Heim's own account, Wallace came over once both drivers had climbed out of their cars. At first, the interaction seemed completely ordinary. Wallace offered a handshake, congratulated him, and acknowledged the accomplishment. Then came the line that stuck with Heim. Wallace reportedly told him something to the effect that he should enjoy this moment, because wins like this don't come around very often. Depending on who you ask, that sentence can land in very different ways. Some fans hear it as nothing more than a veteran driver being honest about how hard it is to win at the Cup Series level. And there's truth in that read. Winning at NASCAR's top tier is brutally difficult. Plenty of talented drivers spend years chasing a single victory and never get one. But that isn't how Heim took it in the moment. Speaking with reporters afterward, he admitted the comment caught him off guard. He said it felt, at least initially, like Wallace was suggesting this might be a one-time thing, or that he still had something to prove at the Cup level. It's not hard to understand why a young driver might feel that sting. Picture spending your whole life working toward one goal. You finally get there. You win your first Cup Series race. The emotions are at their peak. You've just done something most racers never accomplish. And in that exact moment, a teammate says something that can be read as doubting whether you'll ever repeat it. Even if that was never the intention, it's easy to see how those words would stick. What stood out most, though, was how Heim handled it. He didn't lash out. He didn't try to manufacture a feud. He didn't accuse anyone of disrespect. If anything, he went out of his way to make clear that he respects Wallace and everything Wallace has done to earn his spot in the sport. Heim was simply honest about the fact that the comment bothered him and that he thought about it after the fact, which, frankly, is probably how most people in his position would have reacted. What made his response even more interesting was the direction he took it. Instead of turning the moment into a public back and forth, he used it as motivation. He talked about how there will always be people who believe in a driver and people who don't, and rather than answering with words, he wants to answer with results. That mentality tells you a lot about where Heim's head is right now. Without calling anyone out directly, he sent a clear message. If people view this win as a fluke, he's determined to keep performing until the results make the argument for him. As the night went on, several people connected to the team tried to defuse the situation. According to sources close to the organization, Wallace's comment may have had less to do with Heim personally and more to do with frustration over how the race itself played out. One person familiar with the team suggested Wallace felt a winning opportunity had slipped away because of strategy calls made during the race. Another insider added that the remark was never meant to question whether Heim belonged at the cup level, describing it instead as a competitor venting emotion after coming up just short. And that's a fair point worth considering. Wallace is one of the most competitive drivers in the garage. If he genuinely believed his car had the pace to win late in the race, missing out on that opportunity is going to sting. Every driver will tell you that emotions run at their highest right after a race ends. Disappointment, adrenaline, frustration, and excitement are all colliding at once in those first few minutes. Words come out differently than intended. Tone gets lost. A sentence that feels harmless to the person saying it can land completely differently for the person hearing it. What's also worth noting is that Wallace didn't publicly address the moment himself before leaving the track that night. That leaves fans piecing the story together almost entirely from Heim's account and from second-hand explanations coming out of the team. Because of that gap, the story remains open to interpretation. Was it simply a veteran being blunt about how rare wins really are? Was it raw frustration from a driver who felt a victory got away from him? Or was there a sharper edge of competitiveness behind it that some people aren't willing to admit? That's the debate fans have been having ever since. But no matter where anyone lands on that question, the bigger takeaway shouldn't get buried. Corey Heim won the race. Not only did he win, he did it with the composure of a driver who belongs at this level. The way he handled the closing laps under pressure was impressive on its own. The way he handled an uncomfortable comment afterward was arguably just as impressive. And the way he chose to respond publicly, redirecting the entire conversation back toward performance instead of controversy, might be the most impressive part of all. That's the kind of mindset that tends to build long, sustainable careers in this sport rather than short bursts of attention. Looking ahead, this storyline only gets more interesting from here. A first Cup Series win can change everything almost overnight. It can change how a driver is viewed by his own team. It can change how rivals approach racing him. And maybe most importantly, it can change the way a driver views himself. The challenge now for Heim is proving that San Diego wasn't a peak, but a starting point. Whether Wallace intended it or not, that brief exchange has created its own narrative around Heim heading into the rest of the season. Can he back it up? Can he become a consistent threat for wins rather than a one-off story? Can he establish himself as a long-term piece of the Cup Series puzzle? Those are questions only the upcoming races can answer. Based on what played out in San Diego, though, it's hard not to be intrigued by what comes next. You've got a rising young talent breaking through for his first major win, an accomplished veteran clearly frustrated after coming up short, and a few words exchanged in the heat of the moment that may end up fueling motivation for months to come. Storylines like this rarely disappear quietly. If Heim keeps winning, people are going to remember exactly what was said in that moment after San Diego. And if that happens, this short, almost throwaway exchange in victory lane could end up being remembered as the spark that pushed a career forward rather than just a passing controversy. It's also worth zooming out and thinking about what this says about the current state of competition inside organizations fielding multiple cars. When teammates are racing each other as hard as they're racing the rest of the field, friction is almost inevitable. It's a side effect of having genuine speed across an entire lineup rather than just one standout car. Wallace pushing Heim to the limit in the closing laps is exactly what a competitive team wants to see, even if the emotional aftermath isn't always clean. Teams want depth. They want every car capable of winning on a given Sunday. The tension that sometimes follows is simply the price of that kind of strength. There's also a broader lesson here about how moments like this get amplified once they leave the racetrack. A short exchange between two drivers, lasting maybe 10 or 15 seconds, can turn into days of debate once it's repeated, analyzed, and reinterpreted by fans and media. Tone of voice, body language, and context all get filtered out along the way, leaving only the bare words behind. That's part of why stories like this tend to take on a life of their own. The original moment was brief. The conversation around it has lasted far longer. For Heim specifically, the way he's chosen to engage with this entire situation says a great deal about his maturity at such an early stage of his Cup Series career. Plenty of young drivers, fresh off the emotional high of a first win, might have reacted defensively or tried to win a public argument. Instead, he chose restraint. He acknowledged the discomfort honestly, gave Wallace the benefit of the doubt, and pointed back toward the only thing that ultimately settles these debates: performance on the track. That's a sign of someone who understands the long game, not just the moment. As for Wallace, it's worth remembering that frustration after a near miss doesn't erase respect between competitors. Drivers can feel genuine disappointment over a result and still recognize a teammate's accomplishment. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, even if a comment made in the heat of the moment doesn't always reflect that nuance cleanly. How Wallace addresses or doesn't address this in the coming weeks will likely shape how the story is remembered. For now, the door is open for Heim to write the next chapter himself. If he backs up San Diego with more strong runs, this entire conversation fades into a footnote, a minor spark that got quickly overshadowed by results. If he struggles to follow it up, the comment may end up being replayed as a moment of foreshadowing rather than misunderstanding. Either way, the next several races will go a long way toward determining how this story is ultimately remembered. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Did that comment in victory lane come across as a sharp edge of competitiveness, or was it simply raw emotion from a driver who came painfully close to winning? And is Corey Heim's breakthrough in San Diego the first chapter of a much longer story, or a high point he'll have to fight hard to match again? Those are the kinds of questions that make following this sport so compelling, and the only people capable of answering them are the drivers themselves, lap after lap, race after race.